What's up, everyone? This is Soul, and we are back, and we are pretty much we're pretty much hitting the ground running with this Shadowlands coverage. So don't forget to subscribe for more of this and all the Shadowlands coverage that I can possibly put out in however much time that I have. So anyway. Just a couple of minutes ago, Blizzard put out a blog post that talks about Covenant, class, and signature abilities. Now, I took a very, very quick look at what's going on, well, I guess for the most part, let me let you know a couple of things beforehand. Not everything is complete yet, obviously. Not every class has their abilities set up either, and we're also not seeing values of some of these abilities, but from what little I looked at, these look pretty awesome, and well, we'll just take a look at them together. So I'm doing this pretty live right now, so I apologize if I'm going to be stuttering and otherwise just kind of stumbling through whatever I'm saying as I'm reading along with you folks at home and elsewhere. So let's start with the Covenant powers, the powers that we're going to be picking up as we join each Covenant or as we're leveling through. And these are more like utility powers that we're going to be holding on to, starting with the Kyrians. I'm just going to get right into it with the signature abilities. The Kyrians are going to get Summon Steward. You call your steward to bring you a Phial of Serenity that can be consumed to restore some of your health and remove all curse, disease, poison, and bleed effects. Your steward additionally offers access to a selection of useful amenities, each once per day. For the Venthyr, they get Door of Shadows, where you wend through the shadows, appearing at the targeted location. So it appears to be kind of a targeted, you lay it down and poop, you kind of pop up right there. Necrolords will get Fleshcraft, form a shield of flesh and bone that prevents damage equal to a portion of your maximum health. Standing near the corpse of a defeated enemy when the ability is cast will create a larger shield. The Night Fae will get Soul Shape. Let me scroll down. You turn into a Vulpin, increasing movement speed. You may reactivate Soul Shape to teleport a short distance forward. Additional cosmetic forms can be earned and collected through a variety of gameplay. While out in the world, this effect has a short duration before it wears off, but lasts indefinitely while in a rest area. So these signature abilities, they're more like, I don't know, kind of like racial abilities, kind of sort of, maybe with a little bit more oomph to them. Some of these have some definite utility effects, such as Door of Shadows. It's basically a blink, so if you happen to double that up as a rogue, it gives you a bit of a boost there. Maybe it gets you, maybe it breaks stealth, not too sure. But for someone like a mage, it'll give you an additional blink to work with, and that might be very cool. For the Kyrians, let me just kind of go with what I think of these other ones. Summon Steward. Having a full cleanse sounds like a pretty cool thing, depending on the situation and all that. As for offering a selection of useful amenities, that's going to be kind of a tough sell. Like, what do I really think about that? Depends, of course, on what amenities you get. Am I going to get an auction house out of it? Am I going to be able to not have to blow millions of gold on a Brutosaur mount? No, probably not. But I'll be very interested to see just what sort of buffs these stewards will get you. Maybe it'll be something like, I don't know, maybe like an additional Flight Master's Whistle, assuming that there's going to be a Flight Master's Whistle in Shadowlands, or a way to teleport from one region or from one zone to another, because I presume that you can't just hop onto a taxi or later a flying mount and just kind of go from Bastion to Revendreth to elsewhere. We already talked about the Venthyr, but that has some pretty clear in-combat boons to it, assuming that you can use this in combat. With the Necrolords getting Fleshcraft, that has a pretty clear kind of a tanky sort of, maybe a PvP application to it. I do like the nice little bit of, I guess, fantasy in it, that standing near the corpse of a defeated enemy will give you a larger shield. It gives that whole, slurp up some of the bad guys in order to get a nice little buff. I am kind of jealous of Soul Shape, though. It's basically a sprint. That's what it appears to be. But there appears to be more gameplay that's added to it, because you can go ahead and from the looks of it, you can collect other forms throughout Shadowlands and maybe elsewhere throughout Azeroth in order to unlock different forms. I'm going to presume that it's going to be mostly stuff from the Shadowlands though. Rounding this up though, it appears that there doesn't seem to be a clear advantage, at least when it comes to choosing a covenant based on just their signature abilities. I'm probably going to bring this up a number of times, but I think the whole thing with choosing your covenant isn't going to be really about that whole best in slot situation. There was a kind of recent interview that Ian did with Bay and Preach during BlizzCon, where they talked about choosing the covenant and whether or not it's going to be like, oh, is this covenant going to be the best thing for this tier or for this raid or for PvP or tanking and so on and so forth. And Ian's answer is that they wanted covenants to be vague and kind of universal enough that, sure, yeah, in a given situation, maybe the Kyrian abilities are going to be the best thing for this situation, but there isn't meant to be a clear winner. There isn't meant to be a clear covenant that is like the best thing for PvE or PvP or whatnot. So anyway, let's move on to the different class abilities, because we're starting to get a nice little preview as to which Covenant class abilities will apply to each class. And we'll start with the Death Knights, even though we had already visited this quite some time ago in a Game Informer article that was put out several months ago. Let's start with Death Knights and Shackle the Unworthy. This is a Kyrian one. I hope I remember these columns. Admonish your target for their past transgressions, reducing the damage they deal to you and dealing arcane damage over time. Shackle the Unworthy's cooldown is reduced when you damage the affected enemy with a rune spending attack. So we don't know what the cooldown is, we don't know any of these values, but it looks like it's going to be a fairly fast I want to think that it's going to be a fairly spammable ability, like maybe like 30 to 45 seconds, something like that, as long as you're using a lot of spenders. I have a feeling that the damage is just going to be kind of it's kind of okay, but it's going to be more about the utility of stunning the enemy. For Venthyr, they're getting Swarming Mist. A heavy mist surrounds you, increasing your chance to dodge. It deals shadow damage over time to enemies within range. Every time it deals damage, you gain additional runic power up to a maximum amount. So I'm curious what that maximum amount is going to be. That's going to tell me that, okay, cool, if there are several enemies around you, this makes for some good AoE, but there's only going to be so much runic power you'll be able to get, which makes sense for balance purposes. So this has both defensive and offensive capabilities. I don't think that it's going to be necessarily, yes, Death Knights will pick the Venthyr. It's going to be Death Knights might pick the Venthyr, but not a definite thing. For Necrolords, Death Knights are getting Abomination Limb. Sprout an additional limb for a limited time, dealing shadow damage to nearby enemies. If an enemy is farther away from you, they are pulled to your location. I would want more specifics on this, like how many times can you pull someone back to you? Like, let's say if there's like 3 or 4 targets, like it's PvP or something like that. Like, imagine this. Imagine the utility with this. Let's say you use Abomination Limb on somebody, but then you run away back to like your group. Like, let's say you're in South Shore versus Terran Mail or something like that, and you happen to use that ability on someone, then you run towards your group, and then that person gets yanked towards you. It's like having a second death grip, basically. You can use it in a weird offensive way, apart from it being just reactive, like you throw it on someone and then they're trying to get away from you. You can potentially do the same thing. Just depends on how that works, but it sounds like ridiculously fun. And it really plays into the Death Knight's strength. It's like, okay, you get more grips, basically. And for the Night Fae, they are getting Death's Due, which will replace Death and Decay, so it's going to have that sort of cooldown to it, supposedly. It corrupts the targeted ground, causing shadow damage over duration of time to targets within the area. Affected enemies deal reduced damage to you up to a maximum amount, and their power is transferred to you as an equal amount of strength. While you remain within the area, your Necrotic Strike and Heart Strike will hit additional target, some of the same properties as Death and Decay. There's still a lot of stuff that's kind of going on here, and I think if I'm remembering this correctly, the actual added effect on top of Death and Decay is the damage reduction and power transferring to you as an equal amount of strength, the strength buff that you get from it. So not bad. As I'm going through all these classes, let me know in a comment below, what might you choose based on what little information is here so far, or are you going to be waiting for a little bit until the alpha and the beta begins? Moving on to Demon Hunters, which has an incomplete skill here. For the Kyrians, they're getting Elysian Decree. Carve runes into the ground in front of you, which detonate to deal arcane damage and shatter lesser soul fragments from enemies. So for this, it seems like just another sigil. It just happens to produce soul fragments on top of that. Sinful Brand will brand an enemy with the mark of the Venthyr, reducing their melee and casting speeds and inflicting shadow damage over time. Activating Metamorphosis applies Sinful Brand to all nearby enemies. Ooh, dang! So it's kind of like that brand that they have right now. It just does damage, it causes the target to do reduced damage to you, fun stuff. But having it apply to all nearby enemies, it makes me wonder just how potent is this damage over time going to be. If it's like the original Demon Hunter skill, then ooh, that might be some pretty decent damage that goes out. For the Night Fae, Demon Hunters get the Hunt. Charge into an enemy, inflicting nature damage and rooting them. The target is marked for a period of time, increasing your fury from Demon's Bite and Shear against them. You may reactivate the Hunt every 30 seconds to teleport behind the marked target and ignoring line of sight. Oh, that's pretty neat. Okay, so there's kind of a lot going on, and we don't know how long this debuff will last. It says that the target is marked for a period of time. We just don't know how long, but for that time, so every 30 seconds you teleport behind the marked target and ignoring line of sight. So you can at least do it, supposedly you can at least do this teleport once. So maybe it'll last a minute, maybe it'll last for like a really long time, and this is something that you can take advantage of during like a prolonged fight, whether it's a raid or PvP. Moving on to Druids, the Kyrian will give them Kindred Spirits. Form a bond with an ally. On a cooldown, you may empower the bond for a period of time, granting you an effect based on your partner's role, and granting them an effect based on your role. Isn't that like... I forget the name. I'm sorry, guys. But, you know, it was that one ability where they were able to kind of take someone, you know, get a different ability based on the target. Basically, it's that ability. You know what I'm talking about. Leave it in the comment below. Please correct me because I'm losing my mind here. But it appears that Druids are getting that. Whoop-de-doo. I mean... I guess I'm not very excited about that, but it really is going to depend on who you use it on. I mean, at least it appears to be based on role and not class. I do remember that ability that Druids had. It was based on the person that you used it on, so that can get really confusing. Like, you had to memorize like an entire chart to really get what was going on. Anyway, moving on to Ravenous Frenzy from the Venthyr. For a period of time, Druid spells you cast increase your damage, your healing, and haste by a percentage, and it stacks. Huh. Okay, so it's just a buff that you use on yourself. It lasts a little while. Okay. If you spend a period of time idle, the frenzy overcomes you, consuming a percentage of your health per stack, stunning you, and then ending. Wow. Okay, so this is kind of like a use it or else, kiss curse sort of thing. So for a period of time, Druid spell, whatever you cast increases your damage, makes everything better, but if you do nothing, then it really sucks. That's an interesting and kind of a risky move to make, but it sounds like it can be potentially a very, very powerful cooldown, because ideally you're going to pop your cooldowns and you want to use everything at once during this duration. Moving on to the Necrolords, Adaptive Swarm is what Druids get. Command a swarm that heals or deals shadow damage to a target and increases the effectiveness of your periodic effects on them. Upon expiration, it travels to a new target within range, alternating between friend and foe up to a set number of times. So, now it does say it heals or deals damage, and it increases the effectiveness of your periodic effect. So it doesn't matter if it's damage over time, so it doesn't matter if you're a boomkin or, you know, it doesn't matter if you're a boomkin or a resto druid, you're going to get more effective somethings over time, damage or heals, and that's pretty cool. And upon expiration, it travels to a new target within X amount of range, alternating between friend and foe up to a set number of times. Now that part is weird, that it alternates between friend and foe. So I'm going to be very curious about what the cooldown on Adaptive Swarm is, because since upon expiration it travels to another target. Does this thing like last forever? I totally doubt that. How many times does it jump is going to be my biggest concern. On top of that too, it sounds like it's going to be a little bit of a challenge for a healer to be like, okay, let me time my Adaptive Swarm. It's on an enemy right now. Oh, it's on an ally now. I can see it on my frames. I can heal them and get some extra healing over time on them. So hopefully it's kind of a smart buff that moves over to like preferably a tank or something. And finally, the Night Fae will give Druids convoke the spirits. Call upon the Night Fae for an eruption of energy, channeling a rapid flurry of 16 Druid spells and abilities over 4 seconds. What? Okay, you will cast Moonfire, Wrath, Regrowth, Rejuvenation, Thrash, Rake, Shred, and Ironfur on appropriate nearby targets, favoring your current specialization. That's nuts. What? So, okay, so 16 Druid spells and abilities. So in 4 seconds, as a boomkin, you're going to throw Moonfires and Wraths all over the place. That's nuts. For Guardian, you're throwing Ironfur. That's not as nuts. So yeah, that's going to be a really interesting one. Druid Pros, let me know what you think of that particular one. It sounds crazy. If you line up a bunch of cooldowns and everything, that can be like some tremendous throughput that you get. I would argue probably maybe the most reliable out of all 4 of these if you're considering throughput. But anyway, let's move on to Hunters. And they don't have Night Fae stuff ready, but oh well. The Kyrians will give them Resonating Arrow. Fire a resonating arrow to the target location, and fill the area with echoing anima. The effect causes your attacks to ignore line of sight to the enemies in the area, and you have an increased critical strike chance. Whoa, that's nuts! So it's. I'm thinking of a PvP application here. It's like, okay, they're trying to hide behind a wall. Cool, you throw the resonating arrow behind the wall, assuming that something like that is possible, and then you can pew them. That's interesting. Maybe that PvP application won't work very well because it's just like, oh, me as the target, I'm like, oh, I have a resonating arrow field around me. I'm going to move out of the way of it. Or if I'm behind a pillar, I'm just going to back up a little bit. So that way I'm still line of sighting this person for the most part, and and I'm not being affected by the resonating arrow field. Well, there goes that ability. But I'm guessing that there's going to be plenty more applications you can use this on. The Venter will give them Flayed Shot. Fire a shot at your enemy, causing them to bleed shadow damage over a period of time. Each time Flayed Shot deals damage, you have a chance to gain a Flayer's Mark, causing your next kill shot to be usable on any target, regardless of their current health. So Kill Shot is going to be available on all Hunter specs. That's what I'm reading from this, because, well, it's saying Kill Shot and not, something else instead. So that's kind of neat. So this, unlike Resonating Arrow, is a little bit less utility and a little bit more just like raw throughput. Okay, cool. Throw this thing down, dot damage, proc something good, or proc basically your execute ability, and then go to town. The Necrolords will give Hunters Death Chakram. Throw a deadly chakram at your current target, which will rapidly deal additional shadow damage. Each time the chakram damages a different target, its damage is increased and you generate additional focus. Each time the chakram damages a different target, so I guess it sounds like that's something with a very short cooldown. Its damage is increased and you generate additional focus. So on a non-single target fight, in a single target fight, it just sounds like it's going to, deal a decent bit of shadow damage, but ideally you want to use it on some sort of cleave fight. So you're going to be hitting between 2 or more targets. So that way it's creating, 1, you're getting more focus, and 2, you're just doing more damage. So that's not a bad thing. Takes a little bit more thought than, say, Flayed Shot. That's just kind of a, fire it, get the proc, and go nuts. So mages get a full allotment of spells. Starting with Kyrians, they will give mages Radiant Spark. Conjure a Radiant Spark that causes arcane damage instantly and additional damage over time. The target takes a percentage of increased damage from your direct damage spells, stacking each time they are struck. The effect ends after a number of spells. Let's reread this again. Okay, so you conjure a thing that causes arcane damage instantly, and then damage over time. What do you do? Now that target takes a percentage of more damage from my direct damage spells, and it stacks each time they're struck. Okay, so that sounds like a pretty good attack. So this very much reads as something that you want to line up with a bunch of cooldowns, so that way you can get more multipliers going in, bigger hits within this small window, this damage over time. The Venthyr will give mages Mirrors of Torment. Conjure mirrors to torment the enemy for a time. Whenever the target casts a spell or an ability, a mirror is consumed to inflict shadow damage, and their movement and cast speed are slowed. The final mirror will instead inflict shadow damage to the enemy, rooting and silencing them for some time. So this particular ability seems to be very, very specific to casters, which may or may not be useful in every situation, unfortunately. Actually, I misread that a little bit. It counts for abilities as well, but the fact that it affects their movement and cast speed, that seems more like situationally good, but when it is good, then great. Necrolords will give mages Deathborn. Transform into a powerful skeletal mage for a period of time. Okay, I don't need to read anything else. That sounds pretty awesome, but I'll read anyway. While in the form of a skeletal mage, your Frostbolt, Fireball, and Arcane Blast are greatly enhanced, and your spell damage is increased. So it's just a cooldown. It's just one more cooldown, but it's pretty cool. A skeletal mage. That's pretty sweet. I'm going to be very curious to see how that looks. And finally, there is Shifting Power. Draw from the ground beneath you for a period of time, dealing nature damage over time to nearby enemies. While channeling, your ability cooldowns are reduced. So it really depends on which spec that you're running. I'm not familiar enough with mages to speak on this too much, but depending on the mage that you are, Shifting Power might work out really well for you. The small problem though is that this is a channeled spell, so while you're channeling, you're not doing anything else. So you gotta ask yourself, is it going to be worth using this channel to reduce your cooldowns on your other abilities? The short answer, I think, is going to be yes, but I think it's going to take some mastery, not the stats, but some actual thoughts and planning in order to get this to fire off right. All right, let's move on to Monk, who has just the Kyrian things available, but it looks like it's a lot going on here. So, the Kyrians will give Monk Weapons of Order. For a short duration, your mastery is increased by a percentage. In addition, okay, so for Windwalkers, Rising Sun Kick cooldown is reset instantly, and your Rising Sun Kick reduces the cost of your chi abilities. I'm not too familiar with Windwalkers. I'm slightly familiar with Rising Sun Kick, as it being kind of a long cooldown unless you're using a Thunder Focus T, I believe. So that may help a little bit with getting more rotations out. For Brewmasters, the Keg Smash cooldown is reset, and enemies hit by Keg Smash will take increased damage from you. For Mistweavers, Essence Font cooldown is going to be reset instantly, and it heals nearby allies on a channel start and end. So very much a utility sort of thing. It's a major ability depending on your spec. It instantly comes off cooldown, and it has an enhanced effect. Kind of okay, not super impressive, but I would say that is basically useful. For Paladins, I'm kind of familiar with these guys. The Kyrians will give Pallies Divine Toll. Instantly cast Holy Shock, Avenger Shield, or Judgment on several targets within range based on your current specialization. Now, I do remember this pretty well from doing the playtest over at BlizzCon the other year. Before, it was all targets within range, and that was insane. I knew that it was going to be nerfed before it went live, and it looks like I was right. Woohoo. But that's pretty cool. I can throw out several Avenger Shields or several Judgments or several Holy Shocks. I am curious about the Holy Shocks though. Is it going to be healing? Is it going to do healing, or is it going to do damage? That I'm going to be, I'm going to wonder about. I believe during playtest it did damage and not healing. So that may work in some people's favor, and for others it's going to be an ability that they won't use at all, unfortunately. As for having several Avenger Shields going out at the same time, that kind of makes up for the probable lack of hitting 5 targets with my Avenger Shield as long as I'm using like the right Azerite trait or Legendary or Talent or whatever. The Venthyr are going to give Paladins Ashen Hollow. Hallow the target area, dealing shadow damage split among enemies and restoring health split among injured allies over time. The land remains filled with anima, causing additional shadow damage to all enemies. You gain the benefits of consecration while within the area. Consecration for at least protection paladins, it makes them take a set amount of reduced damage, so it appears that that sort of mastery is going to follow through into Shadowlands. But it's basically kind of like, I'm trying to remember, Divine Hammer or something like that. Basically, there's an ability that paladins have where they throw down a hammer and it does healing or damage to targets that are inside. And this seems like a pretty cool ability. It's bringing back something that we used to have once upon a time as protection. It's something that exists for Holy now, so maybe they'll have a second cooldown to throw down. Yeah, I said that. Moving on to Priestesses. The Kyrians will give them Boon of the Ascended. Gain the Boon of the Ascended, granting access to Ascended Nova and Ascended Blast, and increasing your movement speed. Both abilities damage your enemies, heal your allies, and build power that will erupt in a powerful explosion of damage and healing at the end of Boon of the Ascended's duration. This sounds dope. It's kind of like that light form. So you gain access to Ascended Nova, which I'm guessing is like a more powerful Holy Nova, and Ascended Blast. I'm not quite sure what that's going to be. Maybe it replaces Smite, or yeah, I'm gonna guess Smite. No, actually, I take that back too. I don't quite know what this means because I mean, Shadow Priest might get access to this, so. Or do they get one, both, or something like that? But it sounds kind of cool. I'm a little bit worried about that powerful explosion or so. Is it coming from the priest? And if so, shucks, I guess they need to get in range. That's going to change player behavior by just a little bit. The Venthyr are going to give priests Mind Games. Assault an enemy's mind, dealing shadow damage and briefly reversing their perception of reality. For a period of time, the next damage they deal will heal their target, and the next healing they do will damage their target. Oh, that is kind of fun. So I wonder what the kind of PvE and PvP applications that would apply here, and how would they be kind of controlled in a way to prevent this from like being too heavily exploited. Like imagine a boss that's about to do like a really big AoE attack that hits everyone inside the room. Will Mind Games prevent that from happening outright and instead heal everyone to full? I doubt it. But I can definitely see some strong PvP applications onto it. I mean, imagine you encounter a mage or some other DPS and they pop all their cooldowns, they're ready to go to town on you, boom, Mind Games. And then all of a sudden, their cooldowns have just been entirely negated. Same thing would go for healing. Oh, shucks. That the healer is trying to get a last minute heal on someone, otherwise they'll die. Bop, Mind Games, and then they end up killing their friend instead. The Necrolords are going to give priests Unholy Nova. Ooh, that sounds good. An explosion of dark energy heals nearby allies and infects nearby enemies with Unholy Transfusion. Unholy Transfusion deals shadow damage over time. Enemies who damage this target receive healing. That's pretty cool. I also imagine that Unholy Nova is not going to be like Holy Nova that you can just spam. Otherwise, you'd be able to just, throw Unholy Transfusion debuffs on a whole bunch of targets, AoE things down, and then everyone, you just don't need a healer anymore. All right, so let's work on the rogues, and the Kyrians are going to give them Echoing Reprimand. Deal arcane damage to an enemy, extracting their anima to Anima Charge? A combo point? What, for real? Anima Charge? Don't make oh gosh, that's a word. Damaging finishing moves that consume the same number of combo points as your Anima Charge deal damage as if they consume 7 combo points. Now, I'm not great at being a rogue at the moment either. I probably will never be a rogue. So this is a weird one. I think I'm gonna have to actually be in game to try out this ability and see what happens, because it's okay, you deal damage and then you get a combo point, but finishing moves that consume the same number of combo points as this charge. So what if it's a charge of 1? Does that mean if I just get 1 combo point while there's 1 anima charge, does it mean that I did damage that equals 7 combo points? If so, that's great. That creates some really fast rotations to get some really good burst damage in. And if not, well, this just sounds kind of confusing at the moment. The Venthyr are going to give rogues Slaughter. Well, that's direct. I'd figure that's a warrior kind of thing. Slaughter the target, causing physical damage. The target's anima mixes with your lethal poison, coating your weapons for the next 5 minutes. Slaughter poison deals shadow damage over time and steals a percentage of healing done to the target. This also awards combo points. So stealing the healing, that rhymed, that was totally unintentional. That appears to have more PvP application than anything. But just if this is something that can be used every 5 minutes, this is basically a melee attack buff. Nice and simple. And the Necrolords will give rogues Serrated Bone Spike. Embed a bone spike in the target, dealing physical damage over time until they die. Ooh, that's a while. Attacking with Serrated Bone Spike causes all of your active bone spikes to fracture and strike your current target, increasing initial damage by a percentage per spike. Huh. So this seems to be like an ability that you can use multiple times within a short period. So maybe it's something you can apply within seconds. But if it deals physical damage over time until they die, I'm going to guess that physical damage dot is pretty low. So it's going to be a little bit weird as a Necrolord. As a rogue, you're going to be kind of, zipping around, dotting or debuffing all these different targets. Each time you debuff one, it's going to cause more damage to that particular target because, after 5 or 6 targets, that 7th target is going to take a lot of damage from the next Serrated Bone Spike. And of course, everyone is getting damage over time. And then you go for like an 8th target or 9th target or whatever. And that sounds cool. It sounds complicated. And it sounds like something that is most beneficial in prolonged fights. Notably maybe like arenas, I would say that might be like a thing, definitely certain raids. But let's move on to Shaman, and the Kyrians are going to give Shaman Vesper Totem. Summon a totem at the target location for 30 seconds. Your next 3 damage spells or abilities will cause the totem to radiate arcane damage to enemies near the totem, and your next 3 healing spells will heal up to 6 allies near the totem. Casting this ability again while the totem is active will relocate the totem. So it looks like this is going to be, I'm not sure if it has charges on it, but it appears to be a totem that you can throw down normally. Like, it's going to take us back, guys, back to the days of just throwing down totems without having to choose a talent. In this case, you're choosing a covenant and all that. But like most totems, proximity is going to be very important. So as an LE shaman, you're going to have to actually run in to the enemy, throw this thing down so that way it can get in range and pulse and hit targets. As enhanced, not a big deal. As resto, also probably not a big deal since it's going to heal up to 6 allies that are near the totem. So this seems to be kind of like the answer, not exactly the answer to Chain Heal's weaknesses if targets happen to be too far away, because for the most part, people are going to be close enough to get hit with Chain Heal in the meantime. So I guess this is just additional AoE healing. The Venthyr are going to give Shaman Chain Harvest. Send a wave of anima at the target, which then jumps to nearby targets. It deals shadow damage to enemies and restores health to allies. For each target critically struck, the cooldown of Chain Harvest is reduced. So this is this seems to be one of the first, or maybe the only ability that I've seen that is kind of dependent on a secondary stat. In this case, it's crit. So is this going to be a case where having high crit is going to be a thing, so that way you can get more chain harvests out? And if so, that might be kind of neat. I'm also kind of curious how the chain is going to behave. So like, for example, Let's say I I target a friendly target with Chain Harvest. Is it only going to heal all targets that this thing jumps to, or is it going to jump back and forth like the other abilities, might, where it jumps between friendly and enemy targets? Moving on to Warlocks, while I still have my voice, because I'm starting to lose it now. The Kyrians are going to give Warlocks Scouring Tithe. Deal arcane damage instantly, and additional arcane damage over time. If the enemy dies while affected by Scouring Tithe, you generate additional soul shards. If they survive, Scouring Tithe's cooldown is refreshed. So it's a spammable thing, it looks like. So it's one more dot to manage. I'm going to be really curious as to if there's going to be a cast time on it. My guess is that there is going to be a cast time on it. And it definitely looks like the kind of ability that you can't just spam on multiple targets. It's going to have a long enough cooldown that it's, you'll only have it on one target at a time. The Venthyr will give Warlocks Impending Catastrophe. Sounds friendly. Call forth a cloud of chaotic anima that travels to the target enemy, dealing shadow damage to enemies within their path. When the anima reaches the target, it explodes, inflicting a random curse and dealing shadow damage to all nearby enemies. A random curse, though? I don't want it to be a random curse. I'd rather have it be like, just agony. Oh man, if it was agony, that'd be pretty darn brutal. But then I would imagine other things, assuming that certain abilities are going to be unpruned, different kinds of movement speed debuffs, cast speed debuffs, and that sort of thing. So this seems not bad. It just looks to be not exactly a situational ability, but something that definitely has stronger uses in big AoE packs. In PvP, I'm guessing those curses will be much more useful there. The Necrolords are giving Warlocks Decimating Bolt. Hurl a bolt of shadow magic at your target, dealing shadow damage and increasing the damage of your next Incinerate, or Drain Soul, or Shadow Bolt. Decimation Bolt's damage and the bonus to Incinerate, Drain Soul, or Shadow Bolt both increase as your target's health decreases. Ooh, so like a soft execute sort of deal. Nice and straightforward, really easy to understand. Just use it off cooldown, but depending on the cooldown of Decimating Bolts, you may want to save it for moments of low health and when you have cooldowns lined up. And finally, Warriors. The Kyrians will give Warriors Spear of Bastion. Throw a Kyrian Spear at the target location, dealing arcane damage instantly, dealing additional damage over time, and generating rage. Enemies hit are tethered to Spear of Bastion's location for the duration. So that later part definitely has some strong PvP applications, but overall, it's just a lot of damage. Now, it looks like it is single target damage, but it has some utility by offering some rage generation too. So pretty nice and straightforward. Some limited PvP application. Cool. The Venthyr will give Warriors Condemn, which replaces Execute, so forget it. Why even bother? Just don't get it. No, anyway. Condemn a foe to suffer for their sins, causing shadow damage. Only usable on enemies who are above 80% health or below 20% health. So it's like reaping flames, pretty much. The primary target is weakened, preventing a moderate amount of damage that they would deal to you. If your foe survives, a portion of that rage spent is refunded. Interesting. So, okay, so it's a dot, but if they survive the dot, then you get some of your rage back. So Condemn uses rage. So this is kind of a busy ability. It's conditional. You can't use it between the 60 and 20% mark, which does kind of suck. But when you can use it, they do a little bit less damage to you. And that's about it. So I'm not quite sure how I feel about this one. I mean, I like being able to, as a warrior, I like being able to like spam executes. I guess part of it is going to, I guess a big part of this is going to be what's the cooldown on it. I'm going to guess that because it's replacing execute, that it's not going to have a very long cooldown at all. But the limited window from it, I don't know. I'm not quite sure how attractive I find this one. The Necrolords are going to give warriors Conqueror's Banner. Brandish the banner of the Necrolords, increasing your movement speed and causing Mortal Strike, Raging Blow, and Shield Slam to grant you glory. Killing an enemy grants additional stacks of glory. Reactivating this ability plants the banner in the ground. granting an increased amount of maximum health and additional attack speed to you and your allies within range of this banner. It lasts additional time per glory up to a maximum amount of unknown, but I'd really like to know because this sounds pretty cool. Conqueror's Banner, that has a really strong that feels like a really strong ability on its own, but it seems pretty neat. Now I wonder what the banner actually, so it seems like the banner is just something you throw down. It just stays there. It's semi-permanent in a sense, because it has a reactivation process to it as well. Or maybe I'm getting this wrong. Using Conqueror's Banner, it just kind of pops out. It just pops on your back, and then you start going nuts. Then when you use it again, that's when you plant it on the ground and provide a buff to your team. So it's almost like a stance, right? It's kind of like a stance where at one moment you're building up these stacks, and you're moving faster naturally. And then you use the ability. Yeah, I'm gonna be really curious about if there's a cooldown on this ability. Like, is there a state where you aren't doing Conqueror's Banner anything? You know, you're not carrying it, you're not having it down on the ground, and you're just like yourself. Because if that's the case, then this could be a really strong ability. So I scroll to the bottom, and that so far is the end of our feature on Covenant abilities that we know of so far. Now, of course, all of this stuff is bound to change heavily between now and launch. We haven't even started the alpha yet, but what do you guys think so far? Do you feel pretty butthurt that your particular class doesn't have all their abilities set yet? And for those who do have their abilities, do you like them so far? Is this going to change your mind, or is this going to kind of dig your heels in as to which covenant you're going to choose? Or are you just not ready yet? So thanks for coming. Thanks for listening. I hope that I wasn't sounding too mumbly here because I'm starting to lose my voice. I apologize for that. But yeah, let me know what you think of all this stuff in a comment below. And please subscribe for more Shadowlands coverage and all things Warcraft. We'll see you next time. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy.